Okay, so let's see how social login work with WSO2 identity server. So when I say social login, it can be anything like Google, Facebook, or any other social platforms. And also we'll be looking at how these social accounts can be associated with your existing local accounts as well. If you have users in your users store or whatever the on-prem data store, you can associate these social users with your local users so that your local user will be able to access the applications once the social login happens. So under this we'll be talking three main use cases. The first one is purely social login. Essentially what is going to happen is when you try to log into your application, you will be prompted Google or something else. You'll be logging in through the social identity provider, and then you'll come back to the application as the social logged in user. And the second scenario is if you have a local user with a similar characteristic with the social user. Let's say you have a local user in your local user store with the same email, right? So in such a case, you can associate these two users and let the local user access the application sending the local user's profile as the authenticated user. So that's the second case essentially we are going to talk about. The third case is so when you find that kind of an association, right? If there's a similar user present in your local user store, you might want to do further validations, asking or asking for some challenge, right? If there's a local user present, maybe we can ask what is the password of you, right? So the third use case is that kind of a scenario. So let's take a look at the first scenario. Essentially, the user Patrick is trying to access his application. Once he tries to access his application, it's trying to authenticate with WSO2 Identity and Access Management or WSO2 Identity Server. The WSO2 Identity Server federates the request to Google. Once you authenticate successfully, the response will be sent back to WSO2 Identity Server. And you will be able to log into your application seamlessly once the authentication response reaches to your application. So let's see how we can model this kind of a simple scenario with WSO2 Identity Server. In order to achieve this scenario, I have mainly created two resources in WSO2 Identity Server. The first one is, of course, a connection to Google as the identity provider. So I have registered an SP in the Google site, and I have got the required information, and I have registered Google as an identity provider in the WSO2 Identity Server under Connections. Also, I have created a sample web application which talks to WSO2 Identity Server in order to authenticate. So this uses OpenID Connect, and if you go to login flow, you can see simply that I'm using the connection that I used to authenticate. Right? You can either use username and password, or you can use Google as the identity provider. So let's see how this is going to be reflected when you are trying to authenticate to this application. Hold on. Before going to the actual experience, let me show you one more resource that I have created in WSO2 Identity Server. That is a user. This user Patrick has his first name, last name is John. So this will be very important when we are going further steps down. And also he has his country, email, mobile address, and some other things populated under his profile. So I'm going to log into my application initially as this user who is a local user in my user store. So let's see how that experience is. This is my sample application. This is a single page application. Essentially what's going to happen is once authenticated, you will start to see the tokens, ID tokens, and the user information that you received from the IDP. So let's take a look at what is the login experience. As I design, I start to see the authentication options that I adopted for this application. Essentially the username and password, also um, social login with Google. So let me first use my locally created user in order to authenticate so that I will get this local user information. So once I logged in as the local user, you can see the local user's profile information that I'm getting back. It has Patrick John, and it has the address that I put, and also I have the roles of this user, given name, and all the information that belongs to the local user. So this is Patrick John. Now let's log out from this application and try to log in with a Google user. So I'm going to use Patrick Goshua as the Google user so that I will get the user information from Patrick Goshua. So when I log in with Patrick Goshua, you can see the second name is different. It's coming as Jason, and also I'm not getting any of the roles because this user is a social user. He doesn't have any roles assigned in WSO2 identity server. Also, he doesn't have any addresses or any other use attributes that I populated in the local users too. Right? So let's log out and talk about the second scenario. The second scenario is seamless user association or seamless user account linking. Essentially, what happens is at the time of user authentication, you are looking at whether there's a matching attribute with this federated user to an existing local user. If there's a matching attribute, we are going to associate these users seamlessly without hindering the user experience and pass the local user profile as the authenticated user to the application, or the assertion will be based on the local user store user. Essentially, as admins, you don't have to do this account association explicitly, or else user doesn't have to do anything. User doesn't even know that it's getting associated. It's a simple, seamless experience that is gonna happen. So let's sink into the actual demo. Let's try to interpret what I have drawn here. Again, the user Patrick is trying to access the application, and there's a Google user whose email is as patrickgoshua@gmail.com. And then again, there's a local user in your local store which is associated with WSO2 identity server, and his name is Patrick John. So essentially, there is no relationship between these two users, but the email that you have configured in this profile will be patrickgoshua@gmail.com. So essentially, there's a matching attribute between these two users. So based on this matching attribute, I'm going to link these two users and provide the local user as the asserted user. It doesn't have to be the email. It can be any user attribute like phone number, or you can use any of the existing IDs that you have along with in your user profile, or any other user attribute. So let's see how it's going to be reflected in the authentication flow. Back to my sample application. So what I'm going to do right now is to authenticate using Google and see whether I can assert using the local user who is in my local user store. I have done the required changes in WSO2 identity server. Essentially, I'm using WSO2 identity server's adaptive authentication capabilities to do this association based on the email address, and I'm using another configuration to assert using the local user instead of the federated user. So let's see what is the login experience. As usual, I'm getting the available options. If I choose Google as the authentication option, So I'm logging in through Google. Essentially, my Google user doesn't have any profile, but eventually when I land on my application, you can see the user who had an address and all this information populated in his profile is going to be asserted when I'm logged in using the Google user. So essentially, this seamless account linking has already happened. This is happening at the time of authentication. So even if you don't have this required attribute or matching emails at the time of this authentication, if you have something matching in the next authentication, the email, whatever the attribute that you have configured, this seamless association is going to happen. Also, as an admin, you can do these associations explicitly using the available APIs as well. Also, once the authentication happened, if you log into my account, which is the end user self-services portal that we have out of the box in WSO2 identity server. So I logged in as Patrick to my account. This is the local account that I have. You can see all the information that I have configured. You can see in the profile that I have a linked social IDP here as well. So if you want to remove this linking, you can remove that linking as well. So I'll be removing this just to showcase the next use case. Let's move on to the third use case. The third use case is validate local user before mapping or linking the account. So essentially what is happening is when you have a matching attribute with the local user as well as the Google user, you are going to prompt the information that there's an existing local user to the user, and then sort of get consent and also prove that you are actually the owner of the local account by accepting a challenge. So this challenge can be anything. For an example, if you want to get an OTP from user, it could be possible. If it can be email OTP, it can be SMS OTP. But in this video, what I'm going to show is the user will be challenged to enter his username and password to proceed with the account linking. Once the user enters username and password, he's going to get the account linked, and also he will be asserted using the locally available profile. So let's see how it can be done. Into the actual example, let's see what are the configuration modifications that I have done in WSO2 identity server in order to achieve this scenario. Of course, the first thing is you have the initial login step. It can either be username and password or Google authentication. So I want to add another authentication option, which is again username and password. I'll tell you what is the exact workflow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to authenticate users using one of these options. If the user chooses Google as the sign-in option, I'm going to see whether there's an existing user along in the same user store with the same attribute. If there is an existing user, I'm going to prompt the second authentication factor to that user to prove that he is actually the same user as local user who is in the local user store. So let me quickly update this adaptive authentication script as well as authentication steps and see how it's going to work. Let's see how the authentication flow that we configured is going to be reflected in my sample application. So when I'm clicking sign in or login, it usually prompts me the options that I configured. So I'm going to go with Google and sign in with my Google user. So once I successfully complete Google login, it gives me a message saying we found an identity server user with the same email, and asks whether I want to go ahead and associate this user, whatever the Google user logged in to the existing local user. So I can choose one of these options, whether I want to associate or whether I want to go ahead without associating. So I'm going to click next in order to do the association. So this is a one-time thing. Essentially, when the first time the system figures out there's a matching account, it will prompt this and ask you to do this association. From that point onwards, it will never ask until you deassociate the user account. So once I click next, it's going to ask my username and password for the local account that I have. So I could give my local account username and password, and also you can see that I am asserted using the locally available user because I have this address, and also you can see all other information such as role, family name, John, are relevant to the local user that I have. So this is pretty much what we wanted to discuss within this video. All the things that you saw within this video, such as branding or the wordings that were showed while authenticating or doing associations, doing consents, can be customizable. So WSO2 Identity Server gives you the capability to do your theming and all these adjustments by yourself using the administration console. Hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.